Welcome back to our final session together at this year's summit, Together at the Table. We're in for another treat tonight. We have Norman Wirzba, a professor from Duke Divinity School in Durham, North Carolina, coming to speak to us about something that I think we all want to hear more about, and that is hope. But before we bring Norman up, I want to introduce you to my friend Peter Rajich. Peter is at the Laudato Si Research Institute, Campion Hall, Oxford, and we are very grateful tonight that Campion Hall, Oxford has sponsored tonight's dinner. So can we say thank you to Now, we were here at lunch or dinner, and I told Peter, I said, I'm going to read your bio again. I know you, and I'm just going to go from my memory reading your bio. And then I started to read the bio, and I realized I needed my piece of paper. So forgive me, but I want you to know who Peter is. So Peter is the director of the Integral Ecology Research Network at the Laudato Si Research Institute. He leads the global promotion of integral ecology research, which perhaps, Norman, you can explain a little bit tonight. He facilitates academic initiatives and fosters partnerships with an emphasis on collaborations with institutions in the global south. He has academic expertise with a broad disciplinary base. After completing his doctorate in political science at Georgetown University here in DC, he took up an appointment as research scholar and postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Political Science, Santa Clara University, California. He spent time as an assistant professor of philosophy in Slovenia. Then he was in Brussels, Belgium, as the director of the Jesuit European Social Center, where he founded the European Leadership Program. In 2023, he was senior researcher and then director of the Environmental Justice Program at Georgetown University. You can see why I wanted to read this bio. I'd love to welcome my friend Peter up to the stage so he can set our conversation for tonight. So please welcome Peter Rajich.
Good evening, everyone. How are we? Sorry, actually, I have to apologize. I should start in this following language. Come siamo? Buonasera. Bene, siamo bene. I promised Norman that I will start in Italian, and I failed. And I think that's what science is about. That's what research is about. We fail all the time, and our hypothesis needs to be overthrown so that science continues. And this evening, you will have a wonderful scientist here presenting us the theology of hope and more. And I'm really privileged, and it's a joy to be here with you all, and an honor to introduce someone who has become a friend and an inspiration to so many of us gathered here tonight. You'll forgive me, English is my second language, so I need this device to read from it. And while I enjoy it, I'm also learning. And thank you so much for having me here in Texas. This is my second time being here in Waco, and I enjoy it thoroughly. It's really a wonderful place, a wonderful community. So I am Peter Rajich, as we say in Slovenian, my name, a Jesuit priest. Mea culpa, I'm sorry. Yeah, it happens. And I'm the director of the Integral Ecology Research Network, or as we call it, IERN. IERN was born out of the Laudato Si Research Institute at Campion Hall, Oxford. And through this network, we connect researchers, faith leaders, practitioners around the world who are committed to healing our common home. We try to do the hard work of first listening. Listen. Shema Israel. Of listening, reflecting, and acting together. A little over 2 years ago, a small group of us began meeting to ask what faith, ecology, and community might look like when rooted in place. That became an initiative called Loving Our Land and Neighbor, or LOLN for short. Some of our friends and collaborators are here tonight. Jenny and Norman and Matthew and Jim and Amy, and there will be hopefully recording for those of us who cannot be here tonight, such as Austin and Maddie and Tim and others. And of course, Norman, yourself. Now, our growing group, and please do talk to us if you wish to join, doesn't meet just in conference rooms. We dig into the soil, harvest tomatoes, try to cook what we grow. Last summer on Austin's farm on the Welsh border in England, Norman helped us to reflect on what it means not to dominate or escape the land, but to dwell in it. To live as creatures, not as masters. Dr. Norman Wirzba is the Gilbert T. Rowe Distinguished Professor of Christian Theology at Duke University, a senior fellow at the Canaan Institute for Ethics, and director of research at Duke's Office of Climate and Sustainability. He brings theology into conversation with ecology, farming, food, and philosophy. His many books, Love's Braided Dance, Agrarian Spirit, Food and Faith, and more, help us understand that our deepest spiritual questions often begin with the land beneath our feet. Love's Braided Dance, his most recent, is a meditation on hope, not as vague optimism, but as shared loving practice. Norman invites us to inhabit the world tenderly, truthfully, and without paralysis. Hope for him is braided with love, action, and attention. And tonight, he helps us see that even our tables, like these ones here, can become places of grace, encounter, and repair. This conference, hosted so generously by our friends at Baylor, is a part of a wider movement supported through the Laudato Si Research Institute Integral Ecology Festival series. And we are proud to coordinate the Loving Our Land and Neighbor initiative, because what Norman offers and what this community here embodies is precisely what our time needs: a spirituality of rootedness, a theology of land, and a politics of neighborliness. In a moment marked by fracture, political, ecological, social, Norman reminds us that it is still possible to live with courage and tenderness and, yes, soil under our fingernails. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Norman Wirzba.
I vote to just keep him up here. It is so wonderful to be with you, and I'm so grateful to have been invited. And I've been here since yesterday and have been able to talk to a number of you and to listen to the talks that have been given. And I almost wanted to just vote and say, let's just bring Jeremy and Emmanuel back up and let them continue, because I was so inspired to hear what these gentlemen were talking about. So I do want to talk about hope tonight. It's been a theme that has come up several times, and I think it's a really, really hard time, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about the bad stuff, because you all know it. And the reason I think it's important for us to talk about hope is because I think it's one of these fundamental terms that people can't do without. And what I learned as soon as I started thinking about writing a book about hope is that a lot of people are not interested. Seriously. the first thing I had to learn when I started working on this book was, do not assume that people want hope. And I learned this especially from younger people. Because they look at me and they say, hey, have hope. And you are the problem. Seriously, I mean, my generation, white old men, we have wrecked this planet. And they're looking at a future that is vastly different than the future I grew up in when I was born in 1964. And they're terrified. You know, at Duke, I designed a course for undergraduates called Let's Talk About Climate Change. And the idea was, A, we don't talk about it enough, and B, our conversation is far too limited about it. And so we had a lot of different people from across the university come into the class and engage. How does a law person or a medical practitioner or an artist or an anthropologist or political scientist or whomever, how do we engage climate change? And it was really fabulous because we wanted students to see that no matter where they might study in a university, no matter what field of work they go into, they have an opportunity to help us understand climate change and also address it. And we thought, yeah, this is going to be great. They're going to be energized. And then we had to deal with the fact that so many of these students are really depressed. Right? So mental health issues are huge for so many young people because they look at a future and what do they see but diminished possibility. You know, and one of the most important things that we can do for young people is give them a future worth committing to. And so when young people hear people like me say, hey, be hopeful, don't give up, they say, are you kidding me? You know, you're on your way out. We're not. And we got to live with what you are leaving to us. And this is really serious. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to try to write about hope in a situation like this. And I've got younger people telling me that they don't want to have children. They can't imagine having children. And now think about what that communicates when people say, we're not going to have children. What happens to a culture when you no longer have a broad commitment to creating a world in which our children and grandchildren can live into? This is not a small matter, right? So sorry to start out so heavy. But the reason I do this is because we have to be honest about hope, and we have not been honest about our language around hope. And I don't just mean that we don't often use the right words. It's that even when we're using what we think are the right words, we're using them in ways that actually deny the possibility of authentic hope. And there are two versions that I want to present to you that I think are really problematic. One is a techno version and one is a religious version. The techno version, you've maybe heard, Elon Musk has got this. I hear some groans. I hear SpaceX is close by. But this is serious because it has been demonstrated again and again and again how so many people believe that we're going to find a technology that's going to save our boat. And you know, we're thinking now it's going to be AI, and universities are spending a lot of money because we think AI is going to fix it for us. And that's a delusion. Because we think that just having more data and more computational power is going to solve our problems. And here's the thing. We have more data than we've ever had in the history of the planet, and we have more computational power than we've ever had in the history of the planet, and it ain't helping us. So just intensifying that does not seem to be a winning strategy to me. That's not to say all AI is evil. Okay, I'm not saying that. We have uses for it. But let's not pin our hope on AI. That's a mistake. So that's the techno version. The second version of bad hope is the religious one. How many people have you heard say, don't worry, God's got this? That's rubbish. And some people are saying, whoa. What do you mean God doesn't have this? Here's the problem with that way of speaking. It creates the ultimate bystander effect. Right? If you believe God's got this, we can coast. God's got this. We can do whatever we want. Now, when I read the Bible, I'm sorry, that's not what I see. I don't see God saying, hey, go make your mess. It's going to be okay because I've got you covered. I'm your backstop. I'm the ultimate backstop, actually. And you can burn up the whole planet. And it's deeply cynical, actually, to adopt that way of thinking. And the cynicism happens now not just in the religious realm, it happens in the techno realm too, because we know that many of these billionaire executives, what are they doing? They're making plans to leave planet Earth, right? So we're talking about terraforming Mars. Or they're making plans to build their bunkers in Hawaii or New Zealand. Have you started yours? Right? That's the thing. I mean, how cynical is that? That we're going to make as much money as we can, trashing this planet, and we're going to have our escape hatch, either into the ground or up in the sky. Or the religious version, also up in the sky. That's deeply troubling to me, because it's an evasion of our responsibility that gets repeated over and over and over again throughout Scripture, which is the responsibility to be in covenant relationship with God, with other people, and with our land. There's no escaping that. At least not if you want to imagine the possibility of a peaceable or a beautiful life together. So those are two versions of hope that I hope you don't get sucked into. They're supremely dangerous, they're irresponsible, and they're part of the reason why young people are saying, stop talking about hope. I also think it's really important that we distinguish hope from optimism. I am no optimist about what's going on. And we've been in the presence of a lot of bad news, and I know some of this news is hitting people very, very personally and directly. It's so, so hard to see what's happening. Optimism is a status quo concept. Optimism says, don't worry, it's all going to work out in the end. Do you believe that? Do you believe that the systems that we have in place right now are going to be the systems that create a future that young people are going to say, I want to contribute to that? I'm not so sure. A lot of the young people I talk to, they just sort of resigned themselves to the fact that the future's going to suck, and the best they can do is get their piece of the pie. And that's a horrible place to be. Because where's the love in any of that? It's just gone. So give up on this idea of optimism, because optimism says it's all going to work out. It doesn't ever challenge the status quo, which is creating all of the despair in the first place. Hope is actually a prophetic gesture. Hope is a movement against the status quo that is creating the conditions for despair that are making so many people miserable and that are eviscerating our communities and neighborhoods of whatever goodness and beauty is there, and that is damaging our land and our water. We need something much, much better than optimism. We need hope. But how do we talk about hope? It's not a simple thing, right? I go around and I talk a lot about all these really horrible things. And so at the end of the talk, when I have Q&A time with people, they will, at the end, say, okay, do you have hope? And I really didn't like the question anymore. And I started to say to people, I don't want to answer that question. I don't think it's a good question, because it makes it sound like hope is something that you have. Some people have it, some people don't. You know, you hear that, right? I'm just a hopeful person. And other people say, I'm just not a hopeful person. And it sounds like hope is something that some people have. And if you're good, you'll give it to somebody else. And that makes it sound like a thing that you can possess. And I don't believe that. It's not something that you possess. It's something that involves you in the world in a new way. That's what hope does. So stop thinking about hope as a noun, something you might have, and think of it more as a verb, something that you do. So I started to say to people, rather than answering the question, do you have hope? I wanted to say, what do you love? Think, clearly in your mind right now, what do you love? Is it a person? Is it a community? Is it a neighborhood? Is it the state of Texas? What do you love? Who do you love? Where do you love? And then think about, well, what do you need to activate that love? And the reason I think that's a much, much more important question is that now you've entered a new register. Because now what you're seeing is, I have to figure out what I can do to nurture, to protect, to celebrate what I love. And in figuring out what you're going to do in those domains, you actually create the conditions in which people will say, I want to join you. Because here's the amazing thing about our world. When we give our love, our kindness, our attention to it, it responds. Right? People who are hurting or are feeling abandoned and despondent, for them to experience another person who comes up to them and says, we're going to love you, not in the Southern way. I want to just love you, honey. I want to run away when that happens. But seriously, when I really want to love you, your life changes. And we've heard, obviously, that we're in a loneliness epidemic in this country. So many people feel like they're cut off, that nobody really cares. Everybody's been reduced to a unit of production or a unit of consumption. And they're wondering, does their life matter? Does anybody notice if they don't show up? And so they're feeling horrible. So imagine what it would do to our world if those people understood that there's somebody who loves them, some community that loves them. And I'm seeing a room full of people who are doing exactly that. Why? Because when you show up with food, that's a declaration of your love for them. The most hopeless scenario I can imagine is for a child to be alone, hungry. Because what that experience is communicating is nobody cares. Because what could be more important than for you to be able to eat in a place where you know people care about you and they want to nurture you so you can become the human being that is uniquely yours to be. So you all are just inspiring me in loads because of the work that you're doing with something so basic, so elemental, but yet so crucial to a future that is going to be one that we can all commit ourselves to. So think about hope as love in the future tense, right? Hope is love in the future tense. Because now what you're doing is you're getting off the couch to say, now what does love require of me? Okay? On my phone here, I got a picture. Oh wait, I gotta get this off. It's my granddaughter, Lila. I love her. She's amazing. I love other people too, but I really love Lila. I now have to figure out, what am I going to do for Lila? Every morning I wake up saying, what am I going to do today to build a world that Lila wants to live into? And we all have our examples of a Lila or something. And I want you to always have that in your mind. What do you love? Because love is the antidote to fear. Love is the answer to loneliness. Love is the crucial thing that is going to be the power that inspires any of us to want to do the work that we have to do. Because the work, as you know, is hard. And this is why hope is also a communal thing. You don't do hope by yourself. It's too hard. Because the forces that want to wear you down are everywhere. So you need to build communities of people who are going to say, we're going to help you exercise that love. We're going to make sure you don't lose sight of your love. Because, you know, sometimes I'm a stupid person and I forget about Lila. And so I need someone to say, Norman, do not forget Lila and her whole generation. Because when you start making decisions without her in mind, they're not going to be the best decisions. It's just so important. Now you're thinking, okay, let's talk a little bit about hope. Now I want to talk about food and why food is so crucial. Right? I said to a hungry child, someone showing up with food is your way of communicating that they matter, that you care for them. So I grew up in a German family, had a German grandmother. She baked donuts. I love donuts. And, you know, I'm a farm boy, eat a lot of food. But sometimes I'd show up at her house and she'd always have food for me. And sometimes I would not eat the food because I was full. Hard to believe, I know. And she'd say, have some donuts. And I'd say, Oma, I can't eat another donut. I just can't, I'm full. And she says, no, you have to eat a donut. And I said, I can't. You know what she did? She cried. Pretty bad boy, right? Making your grandmother cry? Why did she cry? It's not because I was rejecting her donut. I was rejecting her love. Because food is a declaration of love. Right? There's a very important reason why when you start talking with people about food, you can talk about food in terms of calories, you can talk about food in terms of nutritional content, food's price, food's availability, all of that stuff is very, very important to do. But fundamentally, what is food but fellowship? Food is one of the most basic ways that human beings have figured out how to share their love with each other or withhold their love. Right? That's also important to note. And we have to think about this not just in terms of the human dimension, right? We have to think about it also in terms of this larger framework that we call creation. Because what does God do in creating the world? But God creates a world in which creatures to live must eat. Have you wondered why? Why does God do that? Why does God create a world in which creatures have to eat to live? Because you could imagine a world in which you don't eat. And the reason you might want to imagine that world is because for us to eat, others have to die. You know, when I say grace over dinner and we have a chicken, sometimes I will say, and thank you for the chicken that died, so we will eat tonight. And sometimes people say, I don't want to eat the chicken no more. I mean, right? But that's the truth. It's not just us. All of nature is a conjugation of the verb to eat. Because eating is the connector of all creaturely life. And you have to think, maybe God creates a world in which all creatures eat because it's a way of us having the visceral, daily, multiple times a day reminder, you can't live alone. You can't. You need other creatures. And other creatures need you. In fact, you aren't even you. Because you're host to billions of microorganisms that are living in your gut. And depending if you got my size, it can be a lot more. Okay, lots of creatures that we are hosting all the time. And they're not just there passing through. They are there doing the most basic things for your own well-being. Immunological health. You lose that gut microbiome, you're in trouble. So we have never been one. We have never been single. We have never been solitary. We've only ever been a zoo. That is living life with other creatures living through us and us living through them. There's a reason every one of you has a belly button. Because you need your mama. Right, Jenny? You need your mama, and you need to listen to your mama. Right? This is so elemental, but we forget this because we live in a world where we are taught you do it on your own. You make it on your own, and if you fail, it's all your fault. And it's such a damaging world to imagine. And we're moving in this direction where we just say, do it yourself. Figure it out. And that's not what we are. It's not true physiologically. about us, that we have to be in relationship. And we've been talking about connection. We've seen beautifully described today, like how Manny was talking about Bethany Land Institute, the connections that are happening between people and land and water and trees and other people in communities, economic systems, right? These are all so central to our well-being, and we have to nurture them if we are going to be nurtured ourselves, right? I see food people coming in. My Lord, you all are amazing, because if you weren't here, we'd all be really hungry right now. So this is just an amazing thing for us to contemplate, that we have never been one, we have never been alone, and if we're going to make it at all, we're going to need each other. And we're going to need to figure out, how are we going to nurture each other? That's the crucial thing. And that's why I like to say, food is not a commodity. At the most basic level, food is God's love made nutritious. Food is God's love made delicious. And so every time we eat, we have this very practical, nutritious, hopefully tasty reminder of our dependence upon each other, our dependence upon land, our dependence upon agricultural workers, and our dependence ultimately on God as the giver of every good and perfect gift. And the question then becomes, how do we learn to receive the gift? Right? That's such an important thing that we are called to help each other to do. How do we learn to help each other understand that we should not ever take food for granted? Right? And we have to do this, especially in this very hard time. I just read a report from the Potsdam Institute. This little depressing interlude here. Nobody thinks we're going to cap at 1.5 degrees warming. Most people are now betting on 3.1 degrees Celsius. You have to understand, there has never been a human alive on this planet when we've been 3.1 degrees warmer. So we're looking at a future that's going to be very, very tough. And so we're going to have to figure out, what does it mean to try to show nurture and protection and celebration of our relationships, when the potential for so many of these relationships being frayed and dissolved is growing at the very same time. Right? We're going to have to figure out, what are the modalities of love that we still have to create if we're going to do this properly, in a way that, yeah, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff, right? This is why I'm not an optimist. I don't think the status quo is going to do much to help us. But what we need to live in a hopeful manner, which is the manner of love directed to the future. Building a world with each other where, in the midst of the pain and suffering that is going to come, that is already here, that some communities have been experiencing for a long time, right? We're going to have to figure out, how do we invent new strategies for demonstrating this love? And I think the work that you all are doing around the food space, around eating, creating meals, creating supply chains, whatever it is you're doing, is absolutely at the heart of it. Because what could be more basic as a way of communicating our love for each other than to make sure we're all eating? And we're all eating in ways that honor the life, not just the life of the eater, but the life of the land, the life of the animals, the life of the plants, the life of the producers, the growers, the foragers, the hunters, the fishers, the food distributors, the food chefs, the food service providers, the food cleaner-uppers. All of it is crucial. You see, eating is the great connector. The minute you start to explore what is involved in our eating, you suddenly enter the whole universe. Because what is communicated in a bite, right? Think about what was on your plate tonight. We didn't have apple pie today, but let's just do a little talk about apple pie. I like apple pie, even though I'm a Canadian. First, you have to have apples. How do you get apples? Yeah, you grow them. Yeah, I know. But yeah, who thought that you could take apples, slice them up, and put them in a pie crust? Now, who thought about a pie crust? Come on. Because first of all, you have to have flour. Who thought of that? Really? Someone had to think about flour and to think, okay, butter. Come on. How do you get butter besides the store? Who thought, let's take the milk from a cow and just bang it with a stick for a while, and maybe we'll get cream, and then we'll get butter, add a little salt, and then we'll throw it in this thing that we just called flour, and then let's make sure the water's cold so it's nice and flaky. Who thought of that? Genius. That's incredible. And then it gets even better because you can put vanilla ice cream on top. Who thought of that? Thank the Lord. Right? Frozen vanilla custard. I go crazy when I see that. Now, so think. Apple pie. What's the story there? So you needed to have someone who knew how to grow apples. That is not to be taken for granted, people. Right? We're seeing changing weather systems, so you get late frost. You get a late frost, apples are done. It's a vulnerable reality. Food has always been vulnerable. And we are oblivious to so much of this because we're in this utterly new situation where if we want food, we go to the store, and it's mostly there. But for the majority of human beings throughout the vast expanse of time, that was never assured. And people had to spend so much time either growing or foraging or hunting their food because that was the most essential thing to do, and they had a deep appreciation in the midst of the difficulty about how you do not take food for granted. So we have an opportunity to help remind each other about how we should never take food for granted because it's this incredible, delectable, beautiful, fragile thing that when it's done well, it's a flavor explosion in your head. Nothing makes people happier than we say, food is coming. If I want to do an event at Duke, promise some food, they come. Food is the power of the communication of love. It's our introduction to how magnificent this world is, right? Who would have thought that God could create a raspberry? That's astounding. Are you not astounded by the fact that the world tastes good? Because it could have been a totally bland world. But it's not. And so the creativity that I was just telling you a little bit about with respect to apple pie, what it took to get to that. Now just multiply that across all the different kinds of foods that have been grown and tasted around the world. We have a God who delights in flavor. A God who delights in us helping each other taste how good this world is. And that God's first declaration of love to this world is in the form of providing food for everyone. Which is why God is so mad when there are people who are hungry. Which is why God is so mad when creatures are abused. When the land is defiled or wasted. There is no more important thing for us to do than to provide for each other in the way that God is constantly providing for us. And when we do that, we don't just make love delicious, we make hope delicious. Do you appreciate how much you can be agents of hope because of the work that you do? When you work to provide food for communities, when you work with farmers to help them get their food to people who need it, you're making hope taste good. You're making hope nutritious. And that's a future I think people can commit themselves to. When you think about how so many young people look at a world that they see has been abandoned, that is no longer cherished, we have an opportunity to create a world where we exhibit through our work the cherishing of each other, the cherishing of our communities, the cherishing of our farmers, the cherishing of all the people in seafood, fisheries, in forestry, all of these most basic fundamental tasks of provision. And when we do that, we give the lie to the whole idea that this world isn't worth it. Instead, what we communicate is that this world is love-worthy, it's beautiful, and we want to help it become even more beautiful, help it become even more delicious. So carry on. Thank you.